It began quietly, almost too quietly, in the cold air above Copenhagen. At first, it was nothing more than a blip, an anomaly flickering across the radar screens at the country's busiest air traffic control center. The controllers, experienced men and women who had monitored thousands of flights across Denmark's skies, exchanged puzzled glances. The blip didn't correspond to any known aircraft. No flight plan had been filed. No transponder signal transmitted. Yet, there it was, hovering just outside the capital's restricted airspace. At 6:47 p.m., the first radio call came in. A Scandinavian Airlines pilot descending toward Copenhagen Airport reported strange lights at his altitude. He described them as brilliant white, shifting into an amber glow, moving against the wind. His voice carried tension, not the kind of calm tone expected from a seasoned pilot. The control tower acknowledged the report, quietly marking it as unverified visual disturbance. But even as they wrote it off, more calls began to flood in. Pilots on separate routes, commercial and private alike, reporting the same luminous objects, darting and then holding still in the sky, as if intelligently controlled. On the ground, ordinary people began to notice. Commuters driving home along the E20 motorway slowed their cars, pulling to the shoulder to film with their phones. What they captured would later fuel millions of views online, glowing spheres, suspended in formation above the skyline, shifting in perfect synchrony before disappearing behind a wall of clouds. By 7:30 p.m., the airport's incoming flights were stacked in holding patterns, circling helplessly above the Baltic Sea. The air traffic controllers struggled to maintain order, their screens now filled with unexplainable echoes, objects appearing and vanishing without warning. The senior controller on duty finally issued the call that no one had made in decades. Suspend landings until further notice. As the decision rippled outward, confusion spread through the terminal. Passengers waiting for loved ones grew restless as flight boards flickered with sudden delays. Airline staff whispered among themselves, trying to explain the mounting disruptions without sparking panic. Outside, on the observation deck, dozens of people pointed upward, some gasping, others crying as the strange aerial lights drew nearer. News crews scrambled. Local Danish stations began broadcasting shaky amateur footage of what was now being called the Copenhagen Lights. Anchors struggled to remain composed as they described unidentified objects hovering near commercial flight paths. Social media platforms lit up instantly. UFOs over Denmark trended within minutes. The clips were raw, grainy, filmed on phones by ordinary people, but they told the same story. Luminous craft that defied all known flight physics. The first emotional breaking point came when an Icelandair flight, approaching from Reykjavik, requested an emergency diversion. The captain reported an object the size of a small plane, metallic, moving directly across our path at impossible speed. His voice, captured in leaked recordings, carried a weight of disbelief. "This is not a drone. I repeat, this is not a drone." By now, the Danish Transport Authority was on high alert. Meetings unfolded behind closed doors. Should the incident be treated as a threat? Was it a foreign surveillance operation or something more extraordinary? Meanwhile, every available camera, every set of eyes on the ground, tilted skyward in anticipation. For the people of Denmark, what began as a normal evening was turning into something historic. Families gathered at windows, children pointing in awe at the sky. Elderly citizens whispered prayers, recalling Cold War fears of Russian bombers, yet knowing deep down this was different. The lights didn't behave like any aircraft they had ever seen. At 9:12 p.m., the Danish Air Force dispatched its first response. 2 F-16s thundered into the night, afterburners blazing as they climbed steeply toward the targets. Thousands of civilians filmed the jets slicing through the clouds. For a moment, the crowd felt reassured. Perhaps the military would chase these intruders away. But as the fighters approached, the UFOs performed maneuvers that defied comprehension. Sudden vertical climbs at impossible acceleration, sharp turns that no human pilot could endure, instant stops as though inertia itself had no hold on them. The F-16 pilots, their communications later leaked, could only mutter disbelief. "They're toying with us. They're everywhere." Down on the ground, the atmosphere had shifted from curiosity to dread. People began leaving the airport, abandoning luggage in the rush to escape. Rumors spread of entire terminals being locked down. Inside, stranded travelers demanded answers, but none came. Airline staff could only repeat, "For your safety, all flights are suspended until further notice." By midnight, all of Denmark was awake. The glowing objects multiplied, spreading over more than one city. Reports came in from Odense, Aarhus, and Aalborg. Hundreds of videos surfaced showing clusters of lights moving in synchronized patterns, weaving silently across the night sky. Each recording was eerily consistent: no sound, no vapor trails, no conventional explanation. The first whispers of a larger cover-up began to circulate. Was the government hiding the truth? Was NATO involved? Some claimed it was advanced drone technology from an unknown adversary. Others whispered of something far stranger, that this was the first undeniable mass-scale visitation in European airspace. As the clock ticked toward dawn, one truth became undeniable. Denmark's skies no longer belonged to Denmark, and this was only the beginning. By dawn, Denmark was no longer the same country it had been just hours earlier. What had started as a strange night of sightings and speculation had spiraled into a national crisis. For the first time in living memory, Copenhagen Airport, one of the busiest hubs in all of Scandinavia, was at a complete standstill. Not a single plane lifted from its runways. Not a single aircraft was permitted to land. The air above Denmark had become forbidden territory, and the reason was not war, not weather, not any familiar crisis. It was something no government had ever dared to acknowledge. Inside the airport terminals, chaos reigned. Families sprawled across the polished floors, their luggage piled in messy towers as they waited in uncertainty. The departure boards flickered red with the word "canceled" stamped across nearly every flight. Airline staff, exhausted from a night of relentless questions, continued to repeat the same line. Due to unforeseen airspace disruption, all services are suspended until further notice. But passengers knew something greater was happening. Too many had seen the videos circulating online. Too many had filmed the lights themselves, hovering over the runway and darting past control towers. They knew the truth, or at least they thought they did. This wasn't fog. This wasn't a system error. Something was up there, something the authorities could not explain, let alone control. Reporters descended like vultures. Camera crews pushed through crowds, desperate to capture the panic, the confusion, the faces of travelers stranded in what was quickly being called the longest delay in Danish history. Some people shouted at officials, demanding answers. Others simply sat in silence, scrolling endlessly on their phones as footage from every corner of the country poured into their feeds. The hashtag had already shifted overnight. No longer just UFOs over Denmark, but now airports shut down. Across the tarmac, rows of airplanes sat motionless, engines cold, as if the entire aviation industry had been put on pause by some unseen hand. The eerie stillness of the grounded fleet only heightened the sense of unease. Normally, the air would roar with takeoffs and landings every few minutes, but now, silence hung heavy over the runways. Meanwhile, the sightings had not stopped. In fact, they had grown bolder. As the sun rose over the Øresund Bridge, connecting Denmark to Sweden, commuters crossing by car reported luminous spheres gliding low over the water. Fishermen along the coast swore they saw metallic objects slipping beneath the waves, vanishing as though the sea itself had swallowed them. Video footage from Malmö, just across the strait, confirmed the phenomenon was no longer confined to Denmark. It was spreading. Government officials scrambled to contain the growing storm of speculation. Emergency meetings were called in Copenhagen. Military representatives, intelligence officers, and ministers filed into guarded rooms, their expressions grim. Leaked sources later revealed that the Danish Prime Minister had personally contacted NATO for assistance, uncertain whether this was a foreign incursion or something beyond human origin. Yet, publicly, silence prevailed. No press conference was scheduled, no explanations were offered, and silence more than anything fueled fear. Inside one of the packed terminals, a young mother clutched her son close, whispering reassurances even as her own hands trembled. Nearby, an elderly man muttered prayers in his native tongue, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if expecting it to peel back and reveal the intruders. Teenagers laughed nervously while filming TikToks about being stuck in the UFO apocalypse. Every corner of the airport carried a different human story, but they all shared one thing: the gnawing uncertainty of not knowing what would happen next. By mid-morning, the situation escalated further. Radar operators across Europe reported strange patterns, unknown objects forming grids, moving as though coordinating with precision. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom all confirmed disruptions to their air traffic systems. Though they denied any link to extraterrestrial causes, the timing was too uncanny to ignore. Aviation analysts went on live television, speculating about electromagnetic interference, drone swarms, or advanced stealth craft. None of the explanations satisfied the public, who had already drawn their own conclusions. Then came the first real panic. At 11:06 a.m., a live feed from Copenhagen Airport captured something extraordinary. One of the glowing objects descended lower than any before, hanging directly above the main runway. Thousands watched in real time as the sphere hovered silently, emitting a faint hum. Airport staff evacuated the immediate area, dragging passengers away from the glass viewing windows. But for those who caught a glimpse, the memory would never fade. It wasn't a light, one witness later told reporters. It was a machine, a craft. You could see the surface. It was metallic, seamless, like it wasn't built by human hands. And the way it moved, it wasn't flying. It was floating, like gravity didn't matter. The broadcast was quickly cut. Official sources claimed a technical issue. But within minutes, clips of the event flooded social media. Millions shared the footage before authorities could suppress it. The truth was out there now, undeniable and uncontainable. And then, the world took notice. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, all shifted their coverage to Denmark. Pundits debated endlessly on what the objects could be. Governments issued vague statements about monitoring the situation. Stock markets wavered, airlines reported massive financial losses, and travel insurers faced chaos. A nation's skies had been shut down by forces no one could explain, and the ripple effect was global. Yet, behind the noise of the media circus, something quieter and more unnerving was unfolding. Whispers spread among air traffic staff of conversations they were not allowed to repeat. One claimed the radar images showed dozens more objects than had been publicly admitted. Another suggested some of the craft had emitted signals, patterns of sound or light that looked eerily like attempts at communication. Whether these whispers were true or not, they spread like wildfire, feeding into the growing hysteria. By afternoon, airports across Denmark remained sealed. Thousands of travelers were stranded with no hope of departure. The Danish Prime Minister prepared to address the nation, her face pale as she rehearsed the speech. But even as she stood ready to deliver carefully chosen words, another wave of reports arrived. This time, not from the skies, but from the seas. Fishermen along Denmark's western coast swore entire fleets of strange lights were visible beneath the water's surface, moving in formation like living things. Some described them as massive, others as small and darting. None could be explained. Naval vessels were quietly dispatched, but their communications went silent soon after. The government issued no statement. For ordinary Danes, the feeling was unavoidable. Their country was under siege, not by a known enemy, but by something unearthly. And as night approached once again, one chilling reality became clear. Denmark's airports were not just shut down for a day. They were shut down indefinitely. As the second night fell, the swarm grew larger, stretching across Scandinavia. And then, for the first time, the mysterious craft made contact, not with governments, but with ordinary people.
The morning after the rooftop encounter, Denmark awoke to a world that felt fractured beyond recognition. The newspapers carried sterile headlines about unidentified technological anomalies, but in the streets, people whispered what no one dared to print. The sky was alive. The blackout. At precisely 11:17 a.m., the power grid across Copenhagen faltered. First, a flicker, then complete darkness. Phones failed, traffic lights blinked dead, screens turned to static. For a city dependent on the hum of modern life, silence fell heavy, suffocating. Jonas, carrying his battered notebook and analog recorder, knew instinctively this was no ordinary failure. From the rooftop of the old library he watched as the city paused. Cars abandoned mid-street, children clinging to their parents, alarms wailing faintly until even their batteries died. And then came the sound. Not thunder, not engines. A vibration so deep it rattled the very stones of the city. People clutched their heads, some falling to their knees as if the air itself was pressing down upon them. Overhead, the clouds split. The descent. The formation was unlike anything yet seen. Not scattered lights, not swarming drones. This was something vast, a construct that eclipsed the morning sun. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, bending and reshaping itself as though alive. The people below froze. Some screamed, some prayed, some reached out with trembling hands as though touching the impossible. Jonas recorded every moment, voice low and urgent. "This is Jonas Raven. The silence is over. It is descending." The object, if it could be called that, hung above the city. Silent, immense. Its geometry defied comprehension, angles folding into curves, dimensions shifting in ways that made the eye ache. And then, without warning, a beam of pale light swept across the harbor. Boats stilled. The water froze mid-wave as though time itself had paused. A flock of birds caught in the beam halted in mid-flight, suspended like fragile ornaments in the air. The crowd erupted into chaos. The human response. Within hours, the Danish government declared martial law. Fighter jets streaked across the skies, leaving white scars against the horizon. From across the Öresund, Swedish forces mobilized, their presence visible on the bridge as tanks rolled across in grim silence. The world had turned its gaze toward Denmark. Satellite feeds showed the object clearly, though most were cut within minutes, replaced with government seals or error messages. Still, fragments leaked, and the world trembled. In London, in Berlin, in Washington, millions gathered before darkened televisions, hearing only static where news once played. Online, encrypted forums flared alive, filled with grainy screenshots and panicked voices. The outbreak was no longer Denmark's secret. It belonged to the world. Lena's revelation. As Jonas tried to capture the unfolding chaos, Lena pressed the cracked phone into his hands once more. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned with something stronger than fear. "My brother left more than one video," she whispered. He knew they'd come for him. Jonas scrolled through hidden files, uncovering audio recordings, fragments of transmissions between the Coast Guard and a shadowed voice commanding them from inland. The orders were clear: do not engage, do not resist. The recordings ended with a single, chilling sentence, spoken by a voice neither entirely human nor machine. "Observation complete. Phase 2 begins." Jonas stared at her. "Phase 2? She nodded. "They're not here to invade. They're here to test." The panic. That night, Copenhagen burned with confusion. Crowds surged toward the train stations, desperate to escape, but the trains no longer ran. Families packed cars, fleeing north toward Norway, south toward Germany, but the roads were choked, military checkpoints halting every path. Above them, the object remained, silent, watching. And then, at midnight, the second phenomenon began. From the vast construct, smaller shapes detached. Hundreds, no, thousands, of drones, spheres of shifting light, pouring downward like a river of stars. They spread across Denmark, hovering above streets, windows, fields. They did not attack. They did not speak. They only watched. And the people of Denmark understood the terrible truth. They were no longer observers. They were subjects. The global broadcast. Jonas and Line huddled in a basement with a makeshift radio, transmitting on frequencies the authorities had abandoned. His voice crackled across static, reaching anyone who still listened. This is not invasion. It is not conquest. It is something older, something colder. They are studying us. Every light, every drone, every silence is part of an experiment. And then, miraculously, his words carried farther than he imagined. Across borders, across oceans, pirated signals picked up his voice. In Brazil, in Japan, in South Africa, radios buzzed alive with his trembling narration. The outbreak had gone global. The choice. By dawn, humanity stood at a precipice. Governments clamored for retaliation, generals demanded strikes, missiles were armed. Yet every test attack, every bullet, every rocket simply dissolved in the air, vanishing before impact. The construct could not be harmed. And still, it did not strike back. It only watched. Jonas, standing once more upon the rooftop where the silence first shattered, raised his recorder. The world was listening now. His voice, carried across broken frequencies and whispered in terrified homes, became more than journalism. It became testimony. Denmark was only the beginning. They chose us not because of strength, not because of power, but because we were unprepared. The outbreak is not of machines. It is of truth. The truth that we are not alone. The truth that we are being measured. The truth that silence will no longer save us. The sky fell open. And then, as if in answer, the construct above Copenhagen shifted. The sky rippled, bending like a curtain torn away. For the first time, humanity glimpsed beyond. Not stars, not darkness, a vastness alive with countless shapes, countless watchers stretching across infinity. The outbreak was not confined to Denmark. It was not even confined to Earth. It was everywhere. The world had only seen the first crack in the sky. Final outro. The footage ended there. Jonas's voice, raw with awe and terror, echoed into silence. And across the world, as people replayed the fragments, as families clung to each other beneath the trembling heavens, one truth united them all. The silence was gone. The sky had fallen open, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night after the dramatic council meeting was thick with unease. Copenhagen's streets, once alive with laughter spilling out from late-night cafes and the distant hum of trams, now echoed with a strange hollowness. People moved quickly, heads down, as though the very sky pressed against their backs with invisible weight. The UFO outbreak over Denmark had become something more than flickering lights or distant rumors. It was no longer a whisper shared between friends in smoky bars or a headline tucked away in the corner of newspapers. It was everywhere. It was the air itself, the sky above, the silence between each breath. And for Jonas, the freelance journalist who had stumbled headlong into the storm, the outbreak was more than a story now. It was survival. The witness. Jonas hadn't slept since the meeting. His mind replayed the words of the officials, the veiled warnings from military representatives, and the trembling voice of a fisherman who swore he had seen one of the drones plunge into the icy waters of the Kattegat. He sat by the window of his small flat, recorder in hand, as rain tapped the glass. His eyes burned, but his determination sharpened with each minute. Then came the knock. It was hesitant, yet urgent, a pattern of desperation. He rose slowly, crossing the dimly lit room. He hesitated. Too many strange encounters had marked the past week, but finally pulled the door open. On the other side stood a young woman, drenched, clutching something close to her chest. "Are you Jonas?" she whispered, her eyes darting down the hallway. "Yes." "They told me. You're the only one who will listen." She stepped inside without waiting for permission, collapsing into a chair as though she had been running for hours. The object in her hands, a cracked, waterlogged phone, looked like it had been dragged from the sea. "My name is Lena," she began, her voice shaking. "My brother, he was a Coast Guard. He didn't make it back." Jonas leaned forward. "What happened to him?" She unlocked the phone with trembling fingers and played a video. The footage was shaky, but the scene was unmistakable. Black waters foaming under searchlights, voices shouting orders, and then, from the waves, a massive metallic form emerging. Not a drone, not a light, but something larger. A wingless body. Smooth. Silent. Alien. The Coast Guard's voices grew frantic, the video shaking violently before it cut to black. Jonas felt the breath leave his body. This was no longer a story of strange lights. This was a story of something breaking through, something the world wasn't ready to see. The first Vanishing Lena's story spread quickly among underground circles, whispered in encrypted chat rooms and shared in fragments across banned live streams. But just as quickly as the footage appeared, it vanished. Links went dead. Accounts were deleted. Entire channels dissolved overnight, as though erased by invisible hands. And then, the people began to vanish too. The fisherman who had spoken at the council meeting was reported missing. His boat found drifting near Helsingør, nets torn as if shredded by machinery. 2 students who had uploaded shaky footage of the drone swarm above Aalborg never returned home. Their families spoke out, desperate, but their pleas were drowned beneath official statements dismissing the videos as hoaxes. Jonas felt the walls close in. Whoever controlled the skies also controlled the silence. The streets of fear. By the 4th night, Copenhagen had transformed. Patrols lined the streets, soldiers armed and faceless behind tinted visors. Searchlights swept across rooftops. Overhead, the skies pulsed with faint, flickering lights. Not stars, not aircraft, but something watching. Citizens spoke less. Families whispered behind locked doors. Neighbors avoided each other's eyes. And yet, in every shadow, the outbreak grew. Jonas wandered the streets, recording voices when he could, capturing images that disappeared from his phone almost as quickly as they appeared. He learned to use analog tools, paper notebooks, Polaroid cameras, old tape recorders. Technology had become treacherous. The outbreak wasn't only in the skies, it was in the networks, in the code, in the invisible web binding every device. The rooftop encounter. It was near dawn when Jonas found himself atop a derelict building. Lena beside him, watching the horizon where the Øresund Bridge vanished into mist. The city lay silent beneath them, a mosaic of empty streets and glowing windows. Then, without warning, the silence fractured. A low hum spread across the sky, vibrating through their bones. Jonas lifted his camera, breath caught in his throat. From the clouds descended a formation of lights, sharper, closer than ever before. Not drones, not aircraft, but something that bent the air itself. They hovered above the city, geometrical, impossible. And then, for the first time, one of them turned. Jonas swore it faced him. No eyes, no face, yet he felt it. A gaze, ancient and calculating, falling upon him like the weight of the sea. Lene clutched his arm. They know. The hum intensified, shaking the rooftop. Windows shattered below. Alarms wailed. The formation shifted, spiraling as though aligning to something unseen. Jonas raised his recorder, voice trembling but resolute. "This is Jonas Raven, reporting live. Copenhagen. The silence is broken. They are here." And with those words, the lights scattered into the sky, vanishing as quickly as they had arrived. The silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of something vast, waiting. The shattered silence. By morning, the city buzzed with rumors. Some said the government was preparing evacuation plans. Others claimed entire regions were already under quarantine. Conspiracy theories mingled with fear, spreading faster than the officials could suppress. But Jonas knew one thing with absolute certainty. The outbreak was no longer contained. It had never been about drones. It had never been about lights. The silence had been shattered, and whatever waited above was no longer content with shadows. And deep in his chest, Jonas felt the truth gnawing at him. This was only the beginning.
By the second night, Denmark was no longer facing an isolated disruption. It was caught in the grip of a phenomenon spiraling far beyond control. What had begun with lights over Copenhagen now stretched across Scandinavia. Reports poured in from Oslo, Stockholm, and even as far as northern Germany. Strange objects were seen darting through the skies, glowing orbs hovered above highways, and air traffic controllers across Europe found themselves staring at screens littered with signals they could not classify. The skies, once charted and predictable, had become a battleground of the unknown. Inside air traffic control towers, the tension was suffocating. Veteran controllers, men and women with decades of experience guiding planes safely through storms, equipment failures, and emergencies, now sat paralyzed as blips multiplied across their screens. Some signals appeared to move faster than any known aircraft. Others simply vanished mid-flight. The normal rhythm of aviation, assigning altitudes, directing approaches, sequencing departures, collapsed under the weight of chaos. Pilots in the air faced horrors no manual had prepared them for. At 9:47 p.m., a Scandinavian Airlines flight en route from Copenhagen to Paris reported multiple unidentified objects crossing its flight path. The pilot's voice, captured on leaked ATC audio, trembled as he described 3 bright lights weaving in and out of formation, directly ahead at 25,000 feet. Forced to act, he banked sharply, spilling drinks and sending passengers into panicked screams. Minutes later, another aircraft reported being boxed in by glowing spheres that circled its fuselage before shooting off at impossible speed. One passenger on that flight later described the moment to journalists. "We looked out the window and there it was, 3 of them, perfectly round, glowing greenish-white, moving like they were alive. People were crying, praying, holding hands, and then, in an instant, they were gone, like they'd never been there." The media frenzy reached new heights. Live broadcasts captured footage from airport perimeters, showing strange streaks of light darting above grounded planes. News anchors struggled to remain calm as eyewitness clips dominated the airwaves. The once dismissive tone of skeptics began to waver. What could no longer be dismissed as drones or atmospheric illusions was now terrifyingly real and dangerously close to civilian air traffic. In Oslo, panic broke out as Gardermoen Airport announced a full shutdown. Thousands of travelers were trapped inside, flights diverted, hotels overwhelmed. A viral video from the terminal showed crowds gasping as a luminous craft passed low over the runway, its glow reflecting off the glass walls. Children screamed while adults fumbled to capture the sight on their phones. The clip spread across TikTok and Twitter within minutes, garnering tens of millions of views before authorities attempted to suppress it. Governments across Europe issued coordinated advisories, urging calm, while quietly preparing for worst-case scenarios. Military jets were scrambled, though none reported success in intercepting the objects. In one leaked transmission, a Danish fighter pilot admitted, "They're everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Every time we lock on, they vanish." Meanwhile, civilian fear reached a breaking point. In Denmark's smaller towns, people gathered outside, scanning the skies in silence. Some treated the moment with awe, describing the lights as beautiful, almost angelic. Others feared invasion, a silent armada preparing to descend. Religious leaders gave emergency sermons, framing the phenomenon as either divine signs or apocalyptic omens. Across cultures and beliefs, interpretations clashed, but one truth remained. The unknown was no longer distant. It was here. Inside Copenhagen Airport, stranded travelers faced a second night on cold floors. Parents tried to soothe restless children with stories, while students live-streamed their experiences to captivated global audiences. Anger simmered too. Conspiracy theories spread, claims that governments knew the truth and were hiding it, that secret military experiments had gone wrong, that humanity was no longer in control of its own airspace. And then, an event occurred that shattered any remaining illusion of safety. Shortly after midnight, a Lufthansa flight attempting an emergency diversion into Denmark was forced to abort its landing. Passengers later testified that a massive triangular craft had descended above the runway, blotting out the stars. Unlike the glowing orbs, this object was dark, angular, and eerily silent. Witnesses described a glowing underside with shifting lights that pulsed rhythmically as though alive. The plane veered away just in time, narrowly avoiding catastrophe. The incident, though officially downplayed as technical interference, was impossible to contain. Multiple passengers captured photographs, shockingly sharp images compared to the usual grainy UFO lore. For the first time, the public was staring at undeniable evidence, a craft of unknown origin dominating European airspace. Fear turned to hysteria. Hashtags like UFO invasion and sky shutdown topped global trends. Stock markets plunged as airlines announced indefinite suspensions. Tourists were trapped abroad, businesses faltered, and the world's fragile sense of stability trembled. Commentators compared the crisis to 9/11, not in destruction, but in its psychological impact, an event that shattered assumptions about safety and control. Meanwhile, whispers inside the aviation community grew darker. Some insiders claimed that the objects were emitting signals, scrambling radar and communication channels deliberately. Others spoke of strange electromagnetic pulses that caused cockpit instruments to flicker and fail. A chilling theory emerged. These weren't just intrusions, they were tests. Probing, measuring, learning. In living rooms across Europe, families huddled together, watching skies once considered empty. Children asked questions parents could not answer. Neighbors gathered in gardens, staring upward in silence. Every flicker of light, every passing plane, now felt like a threat. Humanity had entered a new chapter, and no government seemed capable of explaining it. By the end of the second night, it was no longer about airports. It was no longer about travel disruptions. It was about survival. The swarm was growing, the sightings were spreading, and as experts debated and officials stalled, one truth became clear to ordinary people: the skies were no longer ours. As fear turned to fury, governments were forced to act. Denmark declared a national emergency. NATO met behind closed doors. And for the first time, the Prime Minister stood before her people, not with reassurance but with a warning. By the third day, Denmark had reached its breaking point. What had begun as flickering lights and mysterious orbs now escalated into a full-scale national crisis. Airports were no longer places of transit, but fortresses of fear. Entire terminals lay silent, rows of aircraft grounded indefinitely, their gleaming fuselages reflecting the flashing beacons of emergency vehicles parked nearby. The air smelled of coffee gone stale, fast food left uneaten, and the sweat of stranded passengers who had begun to realize that this was not a delay that would pass in hours or days. At 6 a.m., Copenhagen Airport, one of the busiest hubs in Northern Europe, announced a complete operational shutdown. Its runways, normally alive with the thunder of engines, stood still under the shadow of the unknown. Across Scandinavia, Oslo followed within the hour, then Stockholm. Air traffic between Northern Europe and the rest of the world collapsed like a domino chain, stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers. The European sky had become hostile territory. The official explanation was terse and chilling: infrastructure attack, potential hostile aerial intrusion. Those words, uttered by Denmark's Prime Minister during a hastily arranged press conference, ignited shockwaves across the continent. She stood stiffly at the podium, her voice quivering with a balance of authority and fear. For the first time in living memory, Denmark invoked emergency powers, grounding civil aviation not due to weather, not due to terrorism, but because of something no one could explain. Panic erupted. Stock markets plummeted, travel companies collapsed overnight, and tourism, one of Europe's lifelines, froze. The ripple effects extended far beyond Scandinavia. Flights bound for Copenhagen and Oslo were diverted to London, Berlin, Warsaw, clogging airports across the continent. Families were separated. Business leaders warned of billions in economic damage each day the skies remained closed. But behind the financial panic loomed something far darker: the sense that humanity had lost its grip on the skies entirely. Leaked footage from inside Copenhagen Airport circulated online within minutes of the shutdown. In one clip, uniformed security officers hurried passengers into underground shelters as alarms blared. The camera shook as the crowd gasped at a glowing orb hovering just beyond the glass walls, its eerie light bathing the terminal in sickly green. Then, in a flash, the orb shot upward and vanished, leaving only silence, and the cries of terrified children echoing through the cavernous halls. Governments scrambled to contain the hysteria. NATO convened an emergency session in Brussels. Behind closed doors, generals and ministers pored over radar data, intercepted transmissions, and grainy photographs that had already leaked to the public. Was this a foreign power, a secret weapon deployed to destabilize Europe? Or was the threat something else entirely, beyond the scope of earthly geopolitics? The questions mounted, but answers remained elusive. In Moscow, the Kremlin issued an official denial of any involvement, but Western analysts remained unconvinced. Memories of Russian drone incursions and cyber attacks loomed large. Yet even the most hardened skeptics struggled to explain objects that could hover silently one moment and vanish the next. No known drone, no aircraft, no satellite operated like the things haunting European airspace. Civilian fear turned to anger. Social media platforms overflowed with rage at governments accused of hiding the truth. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some claimed the shutdown was a cover-up for military experiments gone wrong. Others insisted extraterrestrials were finally revealing themselves, choosing Denmark as their stage. Still others whispered about alliances, secret agreements between governments and others, now breaking down. The protests began on the evening of the 22nd. In Copenhagen, thousands gathered outside Parliament, demanding answers. Homemade signs read, "We deserve the truth. Give us back our skies," and "This is not weather." The crowd grew restless as night fell, chanting, throwing bottles, clashing with police. Tear gas filled the air as armored vehicles rolled into the streets. The government, already stretched thin, now faced unrest on the ground, while the skies above remained hostile. Meanwhile, the strange phenomena intensified. Reports flooded in of electromagnetic disturbances across Denmark. Entire neighborhoods experienced blackouts. Phone signals dropped. Satellite TV flickered into static. Farmers described livestock panicking under silent, hovering lights. Fishermen on the North Sea swore that enormous dark shapes moved just beneath the surface, as if the phenomenon was not confined to the air alone. For scientists, the contradictions were maddening. The objects defied conventional physics. Radar showed them, then lost them. Infrared scans revealed heat signatures, then nothing. Attempts to triangulate positions yielded anomalies, craft that seemed to exist in multiple places simultaneously, or none at all. Aviation experts openly admitted that flight paths had become impossible to manage under such interference. And then came the Prime Minister's most chilling words. "Denmark is under attack," she said during her second emergency address, her face pale under the harsh lights of the press hall. "Whether this threat is foreign or unknown, our infrastructure has been targeted. Our airports are no longer safe. Our skies are no longer secure. And our people must prepare for the possibility that this will not end soon." The weight of her words fell heavy across Europe. Unknown. She had said it plainly, without qualification, a word that carried implications far beyond politics or war. Unknown, something beyond comprehension. Across the Atlantic, the United States pledged support, deploying intelligence assets to assist European allies. Britain raised its threat level to maximum. France dispatched additional fighter squadrons to patrol the skies. Yet, despite the military escalation, no nation could claim success in neutralizing even a single one of the objects. By the night of September 22nd, the world watched live as Copenhagen Airport, once a bustling hub of international travel, lay dark and silent. Police barricaded entrances. Runways stretched empty under the glow of floodlights. The silence was broken only by the distant rumble of armored convoys and the cries of protesters echoing through the streets beyond. For the first time since World War II, Europe was paralyzed, not by armies, not by bombs, but by something unseen, untouchable, and unstoppable. The skies, once a symbol of progress and connection, had become a domain of fear. And above it all, the lights still danced. The shutdown had begun. But this was only the beginning. As panic spread, whispers from within the system emerged. An airport employee stepped forward with a stunning claim that the glowing orbs were not just invaders. They were being masked, managed, and hidden. And the truth, if real, would mean the public had been deliberately deceived. The silence that followed the unprecedented UFO swarm over Denmark was almost as chilling as the event itself. Authorities who had initially scrambled to contain the panic now seemed to retreat into a wall of silence, as though words themselves were too dangerous. Airports that had been shut down in a frenzy of security and safety concerns remained closed for far longer than officials had anticipated. This wasn't a minor inconvenience. It was an economic disruption, a logistical nightmare, and above all, a glaring reminder that something beyond human understanding had briefly seized control of the skies. The media was left chasing shadows, while eyewitnesses grew increasingly frustrated with the lack of answers. People who had seen the UFOs firsthand were not silent. They flooded social media, news outlets, and private groups with videos and photos. The footage was too consistent, too widespread, and too compelling to dismiss as a hoax. The UFOs had hovered over populated areas, their strange lights glowing against the night sky, dancing in coordinated patterns, and then vanishing with impossible speed. For every skeptic who claimed it was drones or atmospheric phenomena, dozens of others responded with clips showing movements and formations that defied conventional explanation. For many Danes, this was not just an event, it was a transformation of perspective. Suddenly, the comfortable illusion that the world was fully mapped, understood, and controlled shattered. What happened when objects that could disable airports, evade radar, and hover with impunity entered sovereign airspace? Was this a test of technology, a message, or something far darker that no one dared to articulate? The Danish government's silence was met with suspicion. For weeks, no press conferences addressed the swarm directly. There were vague statements about aviation anomalies, but no direct acknowledgement of the UFOs. Yet leaked documents hinted at frantic meetings between military officials and international observers. If Denmark had truly been singled out by an unknown force, then this was no longer a national matter. It was global. Meanwhile, ordinary people were left to fill in the gaps. Forums dedicated to the phenomenon exploded with theories. Some pointed to the possibility of secret military technology being tested in European skies. Others argued that this was a deliberate display by extraterrestrial intelligence, a show of power designed to remind humanity of its vulnerability. Religious groups, too, seized upon the events, interpreting them as signs of prophecy or divine intervention. Fear and fascination spread in equal measure, fueling a cultural moment that would not be forgotten. The airports eventually reopened, but the shadow of that night lingered. Pilots spoke in hushed tones about orders they had received to stay grounded. Air traffic controllers described the chaos of tracking objects that moved faster than any known aircraft. Travelers caught in terminals recalled the surreal mix of fear and wonder as rumors spread among stranded passengers. For those who were there, the memory became a permanent imprint, a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. And then came the photographs. Among the thousands of blurry images captured by ordinary people, a handful stood out. Crystal clear shots of glowing spheres, triangular formations, and elongated craft appeared on forums and were analyzed by experts. One image in particular, showing a formation of lights hovering above a runway, ignited a storm of debate. If real, it was among the clearest UFO images ever captured, and it had been taken on the very night the airports shut down. Experts dissected the photos frame by frame. Were they drones? The precision and scale seemed impossible. Were they digital fabrications? Analysis suggested otherwise. Each time skeptics attempted to disprove them, counterarguments emerged with equal strength. The photographs became symbols of a mystery that refused to be buried. The public's hunger for answers only grew. Why had the government refused to acknowledge the shutdown as UFO-related? Why had international aviation authorities remained tight-lipped, even as airports in other countries began quietly revising their emergency protocols? Why did it seem as if the truth was being deliberately hidden, even as undeniable evidence mounted? Theories escalated to the highest stakes imaginable. Some whispered of secret negotiations, that the swarm was not random, but intentional communication. Others believed the phenomenon was a warning, a reminder that human technology was fragile and easily disrupted. And a few, looking deeper, asked the question no one wanted to face. What if this was just the beginning? For Denmark, the night of the swarm became a historical fault line. There was the time before, when the skies were trusted, predictable, and controlled. And the time after, when every aircraft in the sky carried the shadow of uncertainty. The event forced even the most rational skeptics to pause. If this could happen once, it could happen again. And next time, it might not be just airports that were shut down. The story of the UFO swarm above Denmark is not over. Evidence continues to surface. Eyewitnesses refuse to stay silent, and the silence from officials only deepens the mystery. Whether it was a display of advanced technology, a signal from beyond our world, or something entirely unknown, the truth remains elusive. But one thing is clear. The skies over Denmark will never be seen the same way again. As more images emerge, and as investigators push for answers, one question hangs heavy in the air. Were the UFOs simply passing through, or were they marking the beginning of something far larger? The next chapter in this unfolding mystery is already being written. Stay with us, because what comes next may change everything you thought you knew about the world above.